Hi, this is Grandma here, and we are reading The Iron Ring by Lloyd Alexander. In chapter 10, we have discovered a couple of new characters. One is Ashwara, who was supposed to be the king, but one of his relatives, Nahusha, has seized power and actually tried to kill Ashwara and his brothers. Kana, who we met in the previous chapter, is Nahusha's nephew. I'm going to check on the pronunciation of that. And that one is in the beginning of the book. Nahusha. Okay, we're good. Nahusha. So at the end of the chapter, though, as we get done hearing the Ashwara's story, suddenly a man emerges from an anthill. And we don't know who he is because it was a cliffhanger. So let's begin chapter 11, The Choosing. One moment, the heavy-set man scooped up earth and gravel to patch the broken side of the hill. There, it hardly good manners for a guest to leave someone's house in ruins. As I was saying, guest? Tamar, like all the others, had been staring in astonishment. You? Inside? How? Doing what? A guest of the ants. That's A-N-T-S. The big man dusted off his threadbare vest and wiped his hands on the grimy cloth wrapped around the middle. Doing? Well, living with them, naturally. I wouldn't call it natural, put in Hashcat, as Ashwara, having drawn his sword, slid it back into his sheath. Trees are for monkeys, hills for ants, you're neither. What I want to know is why you were there in the first place. My name is Adikavi, the man replied. I came to be there by happy accident. I'd sat down one morning to meditate. So deeply the time went by faster than I realized. When I opened my eyes, the ants had built their castle around me. They invited me to stay, which I did. Excellent folk, as I've learned to know them. Busy, hard-working, very earnest. A little too single-minded, if you ask me. But that's their way, and it suits them. The commotion outside disturbed my observations, Adikavi went on. I've been listening, eavesdropping, if you like, which is something I do at every opportunity. Finally, I had to come out and see for myself. You have to understand, I'm cursed. What? Something like Hashkat? No, said Adikavi, cursed with curiosity. I was born that way, and so I was irresistibly curious to have a look at all of you. Here, of course, is Miri, continued Adikavi, putting his palms together just as I imagined her. Lovely face, shining eyes, and plain to see a gopi of great spirit. And this must be the young king of Sundari. Adikavi nodded to Tamar. A strange journey you've set on, the strangest I've ever heard of. You've started my curiosity itching furiously. The only way I can scratch it is to find out what happens to you at Mahapura. Allow me to join you. I'm turning aside from my journey for a few days, Tamar said. He faced Ashwara. I may be able to pay a little of my debt to you. I ask to be with you when you meet King Bala. Let Bala know that the king of Sundari supports your cause, Tamar urged. My commander, Darshan, rules in my stead, but if I wish him to do so, he will put Sundari's army at your disposal. Oh, nobly offered, gladly accepted, Ashwara answered. Beyond doubt it would add weight to my words, enough perhaps to sway Bala in my favor. If so, the tables turn, and it is I who will be in debt to you. My curiosity itches me again, said Adhikavi. Present company accepted, but kings bargaining are like thieves trying to rob each other, much less straightforward. Still, I can't resist knowing the outcome. Well, young Tamar here puts himself at your service, Adhikavi said to Ashwara. So do I. From time to time, I have been a suta, a royal crier. A crier? Mary asked Tamar. What kind of work is that? A palace attendant, Tamar said. He's paid to declaim a king's merits, his courage, wisdom, generosity. Whether he has those virtues or not, put in Adhikavi. In any case, it's beneath royal dignity for a king to praise himself. So, with a sutta to put manners in their best light, a lovely gopi to lend an air of charm, and a Brahmin an air of piety, King Ashwara will at least have some sort of retinue. Now, retinue is like a group of people that surround someone who is famous or powerful, like a king, and they each have like a separate job to fulfill. Movie stars often have a retinue. They'll have one person who helps pick out their clothes, and they'll have another person who publicizes their activities, and they'll have another person who keeps their appointments. But each one has a role to play. Okay, so moving on. That's always impressive. A solitary beggar may have a grudging coin flung at him. A king with retainers looks strong and prosperous and is showered with favors. Appearance counts. The less you seem to need, the more you get. You speak some truth, observer of ants, Ashwara smiled wryly. I shall decide that later. Meantime, if you wish to ride with the king of Sundari and me, I shall not refuse. I lived in Muktara before I was turned into a monkey, said Hashkat. I know the lay of the land and all the shorter paths. I'll guide you there and keep an eye out for little Akka on the way. That's the little one that he has actually been looking for from the beginning. Ashwara agreed that all would go with him and offered Adhikavi the horse of the slain warrior. Hashkat, about to climb up behind Ashwara, saw Garuda already perched on Tamar's saddle. What are you doing here? Hashkat called to him. You're a bird, aren't you? Why don't you fly? You're a monkey, aren't you? Garuda retorted. Why don't you swing from tree to tree? My wings are tired. Shma! You expect me to walk? Rajaswami, before mounting, plucked Tamar's sleeves. I must know more about this Adhikavi, he whispered. If indeed the ants built their hill around him while he was meditating, my goodness, do you realize how long that must have taken? And living inside without food or air. This is most unusual. The sort of thing you only expect from a rishi, and a powerful one. But he looks like no rishi I've ever seen. Well, whatever it is, Tamar said, if he can do Ashwara a service, so much the better. Yes, of course, said Rajaswami. Still, it would be more proper before we meet King Bala if he might see fit to launder his clothes. With Hashkat directing him along one forest track after another, Ashwara pressed on with rarely a halt, despite the groans from Rajaswami. If Miri suffered fatigue, she gave no sign. But even Tamar, long trained to the saddle, felt his joints and muscles protest the strain. Nevertheless, to lag behind would have disgraced his caste. Ashwara sat easily, head high. The shafts of sunlight through the archway of tangled branches turned his face as golden as his eyes. With his noble air and bearing and air of kingly command, Ashwara could well have been led a proud army of warriors instead of this mismatched handful. Despite Adhikavi's assurance, Tamar had to wonder if such a retinue would make any great impression on the king of Muktara. Even so, urging Gayatri, that's the horse, to hold pace, he kept that question to himself. Hashkat, not Ashwara, was the one to cry halt. The light was rapidly fading, and the monkey declared he could no longer be certain of the pathways. They dismounted in a little grove and tethered the horses near a stream. No longer fearing pursuit, Ashwara himself gathered twigs and lit a small cook fire and shared out provisions from his saddle pack. Garuda swooped down, snapped at the morsels as if they might be snatched from him at any moment, and flapped to roost on a high branch. Ashwara touched nothing until sure the others had their fill. Even then, he ate and drank sparingly. Adhikavi, unwilted by the hard ride, waved aside his portion. "Oh, I had a good dinner before I joined the ants. No point overloading my stomach." "Nothing else in all that time?" Rajaswami said, settling closer to Adhikavi, and he eyed him with growing wonder. "Well, only to sample a few bits and pieces of what the ants carried in," said Adhikavi, out of politeness. "Not much to my taste, I admit." "Do you do that often?" Mary asked. "Live with ants?" "No, little Gopi, once is enough. One anthill is much like another, but I've swum with many number of fish. Some of my fond friends are crocodiles. I've helped a few birds build their nests and brooded a clutch of eggs until they hatched. What a mess those broken shells are." "I thought you were a royal crier," Tamar said. "Oh, used to be," said Adhikavi. "You see, my mother was a high Brahmin family. My father, Kshatriya, that's the warrior. I claim neither caste. The Kshatriyas disapproved, the Brahmin likewise, and the other caste wanted no part of me. Astonishing how you can vex so many people all at once by simply being what you are. I had a glib tongue. Too glib for my own good, some said. So what better than hire out as a Sutta? An unwise choice given the disposition of kings. Ashwara, he's something again. I know his reputation. I've heard it told he's the best of them, a truly noble Kshatriya." Adhikavi went on, lowering his voice and glancing in the direction of Ashwara, sitting apart, silent and deep in his own thoughts. That must make life difficult for him. "The others are an unpleasant lot, those I've seen. As for you," he added, "you're too young at the trade to be despicable." Tamar laughed. "You don't mince your words." "No, I respect them when they tell the truth. Any wonder I did badly as a Sutta? What king pays good money for plain truth? Oh, I've tried my hand at all sorts of work, but when you come down to it, I'm a journeyer. I calculate if I journey long enough and far enough, I might find out what makes the world go round." "Allow me to inquire," said Rajaswami, "how you came by your highly unusual abilities. You must have been instructed by some great rishi." Remember, that's the very powerful ones. "Oh, I had a better teacher," said Adhikavi. "Curiosity. Amazing what you can learn if you're curious enough." "If you're neither Brahman nor Kshatriya," Rajaswami pressed, "what is your dharma?" Adhikavi chuckled. "I suppose my dharma is to see the world as it is." The sutta was interrupted by long moans, wails, and gargling noises from Garuda on the branch. Hashkat, who had been listening to Adhikavi with interest, shook a fist. "Can't you be still, you dreadful bird?" "Shma, shma, I'm singing to myself," retorted Garuda. "I sing myself to sleep. It consoles me. Do you mind?" Hashkat put his hands over his ears. Adhikavi fell silent again. Though Rajaswami was eager to pursue further questions, the Sutta fixed his eyes on the fire, his thoughts elsewhere. Tamar was about to speak aside with Miri when Ashwara beckoned to him. "I shall stand watch the first half of the night, you the second," Ashwara ordered, then added, "I'm glad for the Sutta's good opinion." He smiled at Tamar's surprise. A king overhears much, most of which is usually less than agreeable. "He wishes you well," Tamar said. "All of us do. You have justice in your cause and honor as well." Ashwara did not immediately reply. When he did, he spoke in a pained voice. Shadows, darker than the night around him, drifted around his face. "This is true. I know it beyond question. For all that, none can tell how matters will turn. Whichever way, one thing is certain. At the end, bloodshed. Death for friend and foe alike. I grieve for all of them, even now." "I too," Tamar said. "I've never sought a man's death and never wished it. My kingdom has always been at peace, no battle ever forced upon me. But you, how can you do otherwise? You are a king and a kshatriya, doubly bound by your honor and your dharma. You have no different course." Ashwara nodded slowly. "I see none. And yet, a throne, a kingdom, what are these worth in blood? Is it honor that demands such a price? Or arrogance? Is it only dharma that compels me? Or wrath? Can a warrior's virtue lead to evil ends? Have I misunderstood what I thought I knew?" "Are you saying," Tamar answered, hardly believing Ashwara's words, "that a king such as you has doubts?" "Have you none?" "I think you do," Ashwara replied. "But you are young and bear your doubts more lightly. In time they grow heavier." He stopped abruptly, waved a dismissive hand. "What happens, happens as it must. Go now. See to the horses, then sleep." Leaving the king of Ranapura standing silent, Tamar went back to the dying fire. Only Miri was still awake. She held out her hand and walked with him to the horse lines, where Gayatri whinnied a fond greeting. "My question still waits for an answer," Tamar said. "Why did you leave the choosing?" "Need you ask?" Miri turned her face toward him. "I listened to my heart and yours. Why should I have stayed? There was no reason to, since I'd already chosen." From the pile of gear and harness, she opened her pack and took out a garland of white blossoms. "Do you remember little Vadi's song when you and I first met? A wreath of flowers is the token of a pledge that's never broken. I give you mine." As Miri was about to put the garland around his neck, Tamar raised a hand. He could barely speak above a whisper. "No. Go back to your village. This is a pledge that can't be kept. My journey lies between us. Would you have me give it up? Bring you to Sundari, a king shamed by breaking his dharma? Or stay with your people, knowing I'd lost all honor? If I could be sure my dream was nothing more than this, I'd do it gladly. I still question it. Even Ashwara questions what he must do. But will do it nevertheless. So will I. Mary drew away. And so, King of Sundari, you tell me to leave you? Yes. Live out your life happily, not with one who has no life to give you. Follow your own dharma. My dharma tells me it's better to look for a way to live instead of a way to die. It also tells me to stay with the one I love. She threw aside the garland, turned on her heel, and strode back to the others. Tamar stood a long time by the horse lines. When at last he went to her, she was asleep, her head resting in the crook of her arms. He touched his lips to her hair with its fragrance of clove and cinnamon. Mary stirred but did not wake. In the forest, the only sound was Garuda's moaning. Okay, next is called Part 2, In the Forest. And our next chapter is called Bala's Durbar. Now remember, Bala is where they are going to try and get him to take the side of Ashwara. Ashwara. So they were here at the anthill, and they're on their way to Muktara, where Bala is. And remember, Muktara is where Hashkat is originally from, which is why he is leading them on. So, if you just follow the map, it helps you a lot with understanding where they are in the story. Okay, that's all for now. Bye-bye.